I'm Basem Wasef with Car and Driver. If Mercedes-Benz invited you to drive any of their 18 AMG models, would you pick the oddball G63, the 621 horsepower SL65, the super rare C63 Black Series, or this, the SLS GT? Of course I picked the SLS GT, wouldn't you? But I couldn't just walk away from that AMG lineup without running a little drag race against one of the SLS's most worthy stablemates. The SL65 harbors a hulking twin-turbocharged 6-liter V12, producing 38 more horsepower than the updated SLS, and a staggering 738 pound-feet, or 1,000 Newton-meters, of torque. But is that gut-wrenching twist enough to counteract its 700 extra pounds of mass? I took the wheel of the SLS and challenged racer Tommy Kendall for a quick tete-a-tete. After barely edging out the SL65 by a nose, I finally had the luxury to spend some quality track time with the newest SLS. Now that we've confirmed the SLS GT's supremacy over the more powerful SL65, which is a good thing, that means that AMG product planners are earning their keep and keeping the hierarchy where it should be, let's talk a little bit about this 2013 model. The SLS was introduced in 2010. It's a unique car because it's the first one to be entirely designed and executed under AMG. Of course, under Mercedes-Benz's watchful eye. Now that the SLS is getting on the years, it was time for a few upgrades. AMG pumped more power out of the M159 dry sump V8 that displaces 6.2 liters, gets a 20 horsepower bump to 583, torque remains the same at 479 pound-feet. One nice little side effect you get from that added power is the engineers say you might get a little more snap and pop from the exhaust due to the fuel mapping. I'm not really feeling the difference here in the Coupe, although it might be the case in the convertible. They also did away with comfort mode and suspension, so now there's only a sport mode and a more aggressive mode that's even stiffer. They changed the damping and the kinematics to give it more edge. The 7-speed dual-clutch transmission has also been reprogrammed so that it responds quicker to paddle shifts, and its logic is enhanced so that it's a little bit smarter on the racetrack. It holds the revs a little bit more when you're in gear and downshifts when you need it. Now, these programming changes that don't sound like a big deal to the layperson, and they only increase 0 to 60 by a tenth of a second to 3.7 seconds, make themselves really evident here at the track. Of course, you're going to feel the stiffer suspension on the road, but the effect on the track is entirely different. So these edgier changes they've engineered into this car could be a response to people saying, you know, I want more for my $200,000. That's entirely possible. But you also feel just a little bit more of a bite on the track. Sometimes on parts of Streets of Willow here in Rosamond, California, they're really welcome. You get more body control and everything feels a little bit more planted. But there are sections in this track where that stiffness is not necessarily welcome. There's one turn that's a left-handed that goes uphill where you feel wheel hop, and you might want a little bit more articulation. Exploring the differences with suspension really kind of give you the two sides of this car's personality. You know, this is of course a docile car around town that's not necessarily as dramatic as it looks from the outside. You compare this to a C63 Black Series Coupe, and you have this incredible sense of occasion with the gull wings going up and this low-slung, wide countenance that it has on the road. But at its heart, it can be a real teddy bear. However, the changes that they've made to the suspension tuning and to the transmission programming just take it to that next level. It inches it closer to a car that makes you want to kind of drag race a little bit at stoplights and push it a little bit harder, and it gives you just a little bit more responsiveness, which is always welcome in a car at this price point. So we build up in speed here at Streets of Willow. You really find this motor is a lot of power for this size track. It's really easy to break loose those back tires and spin them. Sport handling mode gives you just enough angle of attack so that you can deliberately oversteer without completely losing control. It's this higher speed stuff that separates the boys from the men. It makes you really appreciate the things that have been engineered into this car. You know, the chassis is incredibly tight. And you especially feel that with the Coupe because you miss those lovely engine sounds, but everything feels so glued down. Lots of fun at the limit. So we all like to imagine, what would we do if we won the lottery? What would we do if we could afford these expensive cars that we get to test? And frankly, I would want this car to have more bite. You're paying nearly $250,000 for a vehicle that is a purely discretionary income purchase. This is not a daily driver that is your only car. This is probably one of 7, 8, 10 cars in your garage that you're gonna pick on any given day for whatever mood strikes you. And you want that experience to be as satisfying as possible. Ooh. That you definitely get. Of course, this was the top dog in the AMG lineup for quite some time now, but with the Black Series coming up, I can't wait to see what that feels like. It's so fun to explore the edges of where the stability control kicks in sport handling mode, because if you push this thing too hard, it's just gonna rein you in and kill all the fun. But if you get it just right, you get a little bit of yaw angle, it lets you get away with it, and you can drift very nicely. So fun to drift. I'm loving that this transmission is more responsive to paddle shifter inputs. I'm loving that it shifts quicker. We really needed this with this dual clutch transmission. Gives it a little more character and a little bit more satisfaction in terms of what's going on up here and how you're putting it on the road. For the 2013 model year, you do get a little more satisfaction out of this car. You know, that incremental power bump, the tighter suspension, the quicker shifts. However, I cannot wait to drive the SLS Black Series with 622 horsepower and something a lot closer to race car suspension. That will be a blast. Not that we're suffering here this sunny afternoon in Rosamond. You've got a dwindling number of naturally aspirated engines remaining in the AMG lineup. Of course, you've got this great M159 dry sump V8. You've got the SLK55 engine, and you've got the C63 and C63 Black Series engine. Turbochargers do their job so well. They're efficient, they're quiet, they've got a high specific output. You can get away with lower displacements that reduces fuel consumption. But there's also a little bit of visceral magic lost in a turbocharged engine. I mean, that's why BMW started piping engine sounds into their cars, which is what makes the 6.2-liter V8 in this SLS GT so uniquely enjoyable. It's got just a natural, visceral appeal to it. The sounds are unbelievable, especially in the Roadster version with the top down. And you just get the feeling like this car will not come around the same way when it goes into its second generation. There's no doubt that they'll pump more power and more torque out of these engines with turbochargers, but there's something we're gonna miss about this naturally aspirated experience. What the SLS GT really signifies is something special, you know. It's certainly the flagship in the AMG lineup, and keeping the SLS how it is as a flagship, not necessarily the most powerful car in the lineup, but definitely the most iconic, says something about AMG's priorities. It's about the gull-wing doors, it's about the naturally aspirated engine, it's about the quicker transmission. And all of that proves that the bean counters don't necessarily always win in big car companies. And we're glad to see that AMG is still run from a performance enthusiast bent. For Car and Driver, I'm Basem Wasef. Thanks for watching.